Hello again, everyone. Welcome to week 3. I guess the structure for this video, I'll be talking about just kind of following up on the discussion boards and then going into trait and factor theory from the book as well as the article, and then going over some career information resources. So that's kind of the main goals for this video. So first off, discussion boards. I don't know, there's a lot of great thoughts, a lot of great insight thrown out there. I appreciated that everyone was kind of asking each other questions and challenging each other at times. And that seemed to be done in a respectful way. So I appreciated that as well. So a lot of emphasis was placed on stage 4 as career being linked to, basically personal meaning and living out, life meaning through a career. And yeah, I think that definitely makes sense with a group of counselors that would really kind of resonate with us, because I think, the counseling field tends to be quite personally relevant and meaningful. I say that just because I think each stage was important. So if you didn't say stage 4 was, the most important, that's okay. Every single stage can have, there can be a rationale why that one's the most important. So that wasn't really the goal. It's just to kind of get you thoughtful and then kind of defending. I don't really like that's the word I used in the post, but it's not really a defense like, oh, I have to show that I'm right, but it's just like, here's where I'm coming from. Here are my belief system. This is who I am. This is what I believe, at least at this point. That could shift, and that's okay. So that was some of the rationale there. But once again, each stage was important. I mentioned this in last week's written lecture, but I really, really hope that knowing the history of career counseling and just counseling in general, since, as I mentioned in some of the posts, that there was, the career development movement was one of those key organizations that led to the foundation of ACA. But I think it's important that we have an eye on how is the field developing? How does the field develop to meet needs? And I think this will help us, having an eye on history will help us say, have a better insight into what are the future needs in the field, and also what are those current needs that are being unaddressed that need to be addressed. And we don't have to be dependent upon federal funding of certain career development initiatives in order to meet those needs. That can be done even at a local level, at an organizational level. If you're at a university or if you're at a mental health setting, you can notice those needs and try to, in your sphere of influence, meet those needs, or at least attempt to meet those needs. So I think that's, once again, hopefully a really key point that I wanted you to come out of, like having a critical lens and like a thoughtful, intentional lens of how can I kind of view society, view the development of the profession and how it's met needs. So yeah, keep asking those questions. I appreciate it when people ask questions of me, when they ask them of each other, and also of yourself. So let's definitely keep that up. Okay, trait and factor theory. Obviously, the articles are going to talk a lot about this, but the core is starting with self-knowledge, self-awareness, self-insight. Who am I as a person? What are my traits? And I think different theorists, next week, we're going to talk about several different theories, 3 different trait and factor approaches that they focus on different things of self-knowledge. One, John Holland focuses on interests. The MBTI approach, Myers and Briggs, their approach focuses on personality, and the theory of work adjustment, that one kind of focuses on values as well as abilities and other areas as well. So each are going to focus on different things, but the core unifying factor is we start with self-knowledge, and then we shift to this knowledge of the world of work. So inside knowledge, and then I need outer knowledge. I need to know what's out there. What are the possibilities? What are the career fields? What's the accurate information there? And then kind of the role of counseling, according to trait and factor theory, is how do I then make a bridge or a link between my self-knowledge and my knowledge of the world of work? How can I make a good fit, a good relationship with that career path? So a couple of quick examples, one client that I've worked with, I remember she came in and it was like, I would always try to orient clients to what career counseling can be, because I feel like there is some pretty, what's the word? There's a lot of confusion around of like, what is career counseling even for a lot of clients. I think oftentimes they just had like kind of a really narrow view of what it could include. So I tried to broaden it, like, hey, we can definitely address, career information, assessing your interests through through formal career assessments, but it can also just be like self-identity exploration, personal meaning, addressing mental health needs that are impacting your career development. So one client was just like, I really do just kind of lack the self-knowledge, and I think an assessment would be helpful. So we kind of together came up with, which assessments might be meaningful, which from the brief description, she chose, the strong interest inventory. We did that interest inventory and interpreted it, and she found she wasn't aware of certain occupations, and she wasn't really aware of like, who am I as a person, but the assessment brought to the surface her interests and then linked her to an interest that seemed to be meaningful. And that's all that she really wanted to get from our relationship. So that approach, I guess why I share that example is because sometimes the trait and factor approach is exactly what clients need, because it is just following that structure that's developed: self-knowledge, knowledge of work, making that connection. Another client came in who initially that's kind of what he wanted. It appeared that he kind of wanted this self-knowledge, knowledge of work connection of the two. And so we're kind of moving that direction, but there's also kind of this qualitative kind of identity development conversations that we'd have: who he is as a person, some of the challenges he's facing, who he's kind of developing to be as a student and as a person. But, as we were getting closer to going into the assessments, like one session he came in and a significant relationship, like a romantic relationship, had just ended for him. And that was kind of shattering for him. Yeah, it's like an inner earthquake of like, holy cow, this was like so important to me, and it's just kind of, I've lost it. So he started to kind of question a lot of things about himself and kind of feel his self-efficacy, his self-esteem was kind of tanking, and that was impacting his academics and his career decision-making. So it's interesting to note that it wasn't like an exact trait and factor approach at that point. Like we had to like broaden to address the immediate needs. And then we ended up shifting back at times to like, kind of like, let's get more information about yourself and of the world of work. So he's able to kind of make that link, but it was almost like we were encompassing trait and factor, but in just almost like a formal counseling relationship as well, addressing those challenges that were holding it back and really emotionally impacting it. So I wanted to share that one just to show that, trait and factor can still be helpful, as well as kind of embracing a fuller picture of client experience. So hopefully that's kind of helpful to recognize that, it's not an either or. It's not like either I do trait and factor theory or another one. There could be a lot of integration, but there can be still the core of who you are in your belief system. Okay, I'm going to shift to the article now. Some of this overlaps with what I was just talking about from the text of trait and factor theory. First, this kind of like a small note that would be helpful. A lot of this information is going to be helpful for the NCE, for the National Counselor Examination. So if you want to be licensed, you're going to need to take the NCE, and career development's a significant portion of the exam. So I wanted to give a plug for that, because some certain years they really heavily lean on that career development for a lot of those questions. Okay, so on page 519 of the chart and text, that article, I think they mentioned two kind of interesting phrases that I've heard in multiple places in the literature. So they mention a test and tell approach. So sometimes trait and factor is just kind of seen as this really simplistic test and tell. Here's the test, tell them what the results are, period, done. And another way that's been described is 3 interviews and a cloud of dust. First session, we get to know each other. Second, we interpret the assessments. Third, we wrap up. So sometimes career counseling from this trait and factor approach can kind of have this, like I said, simplistic kind of reductionist approach that kind of really directive from the counselor that here's the flow, you follow it 3 sessions, you're done. And I've worked with some colleagues and in some settings where that kind of seemed really accurate. That's kind of what the approach was. We kind of led to broadening that perspective for clients, but I think Chartrand also then goes on to kind of challenge those assumptions that trait and factor theory doesn't have to be that way, even if, sometimes on the surface it's seen that way, or for certain people it is that way. But let's see, Chartrand mentions that, you don't have to be incredibly directive. It doesn't have to only be a directive process or a cognitive process in trait and factor theory. I think if it does, then it misses the fuller mark. And I think that's what Charton was trying to say, and trying to advocate that, maybe there's still advantages of this, of considering and utilizing this trait and factor approach that does integrate, the emotional side of the clients, that is more collaborative with clients. I think it's, in practice, at least in my experience with a small sample size to draw from this anecdotal evidence that I have, but I think it's kind of hard. And I think it often can. The trait and factor approach can often be directive and more focused on cognitive elements of experience rather than kind of the fuller emotional and cognition and behaviors. But once again, maybe that's missing the mark of the intent. And so, yeah, absolutely. The relationship can still be emphasized. On page 522, Charton talks about that. Charton also still focuses on that, the trait and factor approach is kind of like a teaching role rather than like a facilitator or a counselor role. So I think being in that teacher role kind of assumes that the counselor then is more of the expert. So that's where maybe the directive perspective of like, oh, I need to direct you and kind of direct the sessions because I'm the expert, I'm the teacher to facilitate, your process. I don't think it has to be that way necessarily, but I think it often is kind of at the core theoretical foundations. It's kind of that more directive side of the continuum. On page 522 and then going into 523, Charton talked about how sometimes Charton is kind of it kind of seemed like advocating for why sometimes the counselor needs to be the expert. Basically, it was mentioned that the counselor expertness can be a means of facilitating client change. And what that might look like on the surface is like the counselor saying, okay, here are my credentials, here's my experience. The client might kind of like, okay, this person has these credentials, so I need to learn from them. They can teach me the process. I'm not really sure, at least in my lived experience, and it could be my bias, probably is, but it hasn't often worked from my perspective to have the counselor expertness and kind of the teaching perspective to lead to lasting client change. I think, even if the counselor is the expert, that's okay. People can have that perspective, absolutely. But if the client doesn't find intrinsic motivation to change, then it's really difficult to have lasting change. So if the client or the counselor being the expert can lead to that inner intrinsic motivation and drive and the decision to change, then great. Once again, I'm trying to own my perspective. You can kind of tell that I don't really fully practice from this approach, but I've learned a lot about it and kind of seen it in practice enough to kind of form my own opinions. But I want you to also kind of come to your own perspectives on it. Okay. Page 523, there's two last thoughts that I want to make on the article, and then I'm going to shift to career information. I appreciated a lot that Charton talked about in page 523 of the article, that assessment is only part of the counseling process. It's not the whole, so the assessment process doesn't have to be the core, kind of mechanism for process in counseling. I think that's helpful to notice because I think sometimes, once again, as I've talked about a lot, especially in this theory, that seems to have kind of received the attention that that's the core focus is the assessment. But, when you do make decisions about assessment, Charton talked about like making choices with the client, what assessments they might want to use and why. I think once again, kind of helps the relationship become more collaborative, help the client understand, like kind of take ownership of the process. I think that can, once again, that can be the relationship factor of kind of building that relationship, helping the client kind of take steps to, step into the driver's seat of their career development. Okay, so those are just a few thoughts. There's obviously lots more in the readings, and I'm excited to hear what everyone thinks. Obviously, we're focusing in the discussion a little bit more on career information, so I'm going to focus on that. But if there are some kind of reactions to, trait and factor theory in the Charton article as they kind of come into career information, great. I think we can probably synthesize that well. So there's a lot of career information out there, a lot of online resources. There's a ton. I'm going to focus just on the Bureau of Labor Statistics because I've noticed that a lot of times, a lot of those articles, or excuse me, those resources for career information, a lot of them draw from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So like at the bottom of their page, they said, you know, information from Bureau of Labor Statistics or Department of Labor, you know. So I'm going to share my screen real quick, and we're just going to look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics website, the Occupational Outlook Handbook, just to give a few examples and kind of show what it looks like. One moment. Okay. So here is bls.gov/OOH/ Occupational Handbook. So this is basically the main page here, where they have it, you know, separated by groups, occupational groups. You can click in here, and then they give you a big list of, I'll just do it really quick. We go into healthcare. There's a big list of occupations that meet this with a brief job summary, educational needs, and the median pay. And then you can click those to look into it more. Do you want to jump back here real quick though? So there's featured occupations. There's different ways of selecting, kind of filtering what you want to look for. Just an A to Z index, you know, browsing occupations by different categories here. So I'll just jump back to healthcare really quick, and maybe we can click on, let's see. There's a lot of interesting ones. Let's just look at physical therapists. So they typically have a video. They're pretty informative there. But the main page is basically the summary, you know, how much they make, the educational level, you know, the type of training, et cetera, you know, the job outlook. So that in the next 10 years, I guess from 2020 to 2030, the anticipated growth is that there's going to be an increase of 21% need for this field. But that can, I saw some like several years ago that showed it like over 100% job growth. And then like 2 years later, it tanked. So like sometimes these projections, that's what they are, they're projections. So they don't know for sure, but there's evidence to kind of suggest, but yeah, it's never for sure. Okay, what physical therapists do, just going briefly, you can either click here on the hyperlinks to learn more, or you can just go up here at the top and it leads you to the same information. So if we go to how to become one, talk about the education, license certifications, important qualities, you can navigate here as well, the pay, different depending on where you're working, you know, nursing and residential care facilities appears to have the highest annual median wages. Did want to jump over really quick. Here's the job outlook. But then state and area data, this can be pretty interesting. If we go to the occupational employment and wage statistics section, and you can like hover over a state. I'm in Idaho, so in Idaho, physical therapists average 82,000, and like it shows that there's 1,190 who are employed in the state. If we go to Colorado, 87,000 is the median, the annual mean wage. There's lots more, you know, positions there, 5,130 more people there too, though. So you can go to any state and do that for the US. And then it also goes out by like, you know, it even breaks it up more, you know, so you can just go to like specifically the Denver, Aurora, Lakewood area. Here's, you know, the income. The Northwest corner, you know, here's what's the information there. So you can find some pretty interesting information. I just briefly wanted to share that. I don't want you to all, you know, lean and think, oh, I only need to use the Bureau of Labor Statistics. You can feel free to look at those other resources as well from the written lecture, but I just lean on that one. So I wanted to just kind of give you some examples and kind of show how you can kind of delve in even more to kind of get in there and really understand more about data. And once again, the Bureau of Labor Statistics has been really accurate information. It's updated regularly. Yeah, so once again, that resource works for me, but I really hope you all find the resources that work for you. ONET can be a great one as well. That's one that I've used quite a bit. Mostly I've used ONET and BLS. So yeah, I look forward to you all exploring these information sources, finding what works for you and being kind of thinking about what clients might need. And once again, the purpose of this is that it's not just so we can dispense information, it's so we can help the client develop self-knowledge. Who am I as a person? And then know where to go to find information of like, now where is my career home? So I think that's why like the information is absolutely important in career counseling. I think that's, you know, pretty unique. You know, other forms don't, I guess there's psychoeducational groups and styles in mental health counseling in general, but you know, the information for career is really important. to only have the self-knowledge, but not really know how to make the link to an area or a career, obviously would be missing the full mark. It's not the full picture. So excited to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching the video, and feel free to reach out to me for office hours, just questions. Some of you have been sending me messages in Blackboard. Continue to do that. I'm happy to engage, and I look forward to another week. I'm trying to stop recording. There we go.